Winter was almost over, and I really needed it to be. I won't go so far as to say it was also winter in my heart. It was. But I was definitely heartsick. I'd been living in Texas, working on my master's degree at this conservative Catholic graduate university. And in my spare time, I was trying to secure some longer-term work. The denim jumpers and handmade linen skirts I wore communicated, I think, quite effectively to my male colleagues, why, yes, I will homeschool our babies. The man who broke my heart that year wore Dockers, followed etiquette rules, studied literature, and prayed with the dying. Unfortunately, though I had prayed faithfully about our relationship, loved what was good and godly in him, practiced all the wisdom I possessed, and longed for good and godly things for myself, here I was at the end of winter, very much alone. I was sad and I was confused, but I wanted to be well and I wanted to know God in this, and I needed some sort of sign that all of my hopes weren't going to be radically disappointed always. So, as winter turned to spring, I decided to plant a garden. And not just to take my mind off the heartache. This garden was a practice in hope. This garden was a chance to see dead-seeming things come to life. This garden was a prayer. I was living in an apartment complex, so no yard, just a patio. A container garden would have to suffice. I started small, 5 or 6 terracotta pots, varying sizes. I can't remember everything I planted, but I know there was a red rose bush in one, the largest container, Gerber daisies, because my roommate liked those, tomatoes, because I thought I should try to like them, and a geranium in a basket to hang from the patio roof. I planted everything carefully and watched and watered faithfully, but every plant was painfully slow to grow. There were probably 4 roses that bloomed that entire spring. The only exception to my nearly sterile garden was this geranium, vibrant and florid. This red viney thing was visible from our living room window. So despite my gardening failures, when friends would come over, they'd look out the window and say, "Oh, you have a garden, pretty." And I'd think, barely. One day when I was climbing on a chair to water the hanging plant, I noticed what seemed to be the beginnings of a bird's nest in the basket. Now, I'm no bird expert, but I figured that a wet nest isn't a likely bird home. So, even though, or perhaps because this was the only plant of mine that bloomed, I knew what I needed to do. I would let the geranium die so that the bird would live. Here was the answer to my prayer. This was going to be my sign. Sure enough, as I predicted, when I stopped watering the geranium, it started to die, and the bird continued to build its home. So within a few weeks, there were 3, those 4 in the picture, but there were 3 eggs in this precious nest. I was expecting baby birds, and my friends were expecting them with me. I remember running into my friend Annie out front of the university library. Annie was this precious homeschooled Catholic gal from Kentucky. She could recite the Lady of Shalott in all sincerity. She was wearing a peasant blouse and a gingham skirt, and after confessing to me, "Melissa, I'm so embarrassed. I just lit my bangs on fire trying to light my cigarette," she said, She asked me, "Have your baby birds hatched?" They did hatch. Tiny, squeaky, vulnerable sparrows. And I would sneak out to the porch to peek into that nest, even though it made that mama bird mad. She'd perch on the railing, chirping something awful. Those birds must not have been 2 weeks old when I woke one morning after a rainstorm to the sound of that mama bird squawking. I went out to the porch because I knew something was wrong. The storm had been strong, and the basket was not sufficient shelter. 2 of the birds were flooded out and lay smashed on the concrete, and the 3rd was cold and dead in the nest. There's not much more plot to my story. I buried those baby birds, and I felt with terrible force God's refusal to prove himself to me on my terms. Later that afternoon, I read a line from Hamlet. "We defy augury," Hamlet says. "There's special providence in the fall of a sparrow." Augury's the ancient pagan art of looking for signs from God by interpreting the movement of birds. And Hamlet says, no, the only thing we know is that God was with that sparrow while it fell. And here, 12 years later, since I never received a sign, I don't know much about how to interpret my story for you, but I know that God was with me as I buried those baby birds.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.